Okay, so in this video we're going to demonstrate how to invest the maxillary partial, and in this particular case it involves 3 clasps that have been tagged to the model surface to ensure that they're not being displaced during packing. And we have an interior flange here with a ridge light type of finish on this tooth, which requires a little bit of finesse here to invest this model to ensure that we block out all the undercuts. Okay, so I have sufficient amount of stone here. It's half and half mix between plaster and stone. I'm going to add some water to it. Consistency I'm looking for is somewhat of a thick consistency where the plaster, upon spatulation, as you can see, upon final spatulation, it holds its weight like so. But I'll continue to spatulate a little bit further on the vibrator. Good. And then coming over here, dispense a small amount, just to the height of the flask. I'll set that to the side and bring my model over. And typically, because of this interior flange, if you're working with cases like so, I'll tilt the model towards the back of the flask a little bit. Now from this point on, we want to make sure that we block out any possible undercuts. As much as we can at this point. I'm just going to introduce a little bit of plaster here. Now, my spatula now becomes a little bit too big for some of the areas that I'm trying to get the stone into. So I'll set this one aside. And now I have my font stock. Now I can actually pick up the flask off the bench and get inside these little areas. And ensure that I block out any undercuts and certainly not create any either with my investing. That's also a possibility, right? Sometimes you want to just smear a little bit of plaster on top of the wire here. So for complicated partial cases, whether they're acrylic or cast partial cases, I always suggest to do them one at a time. We have a little bit of an undercut here, lingual, on the lingual side, and here. I don't want to mess around with it too much. I want this plaster to, the investment to start setting a little bit of undercut right here. So you have to be very, very precise with the block out. There's a bit of an undercut mesial of the 4 there. I want to get it very, very close to that tooth, but not cover the tooth itself. So, like in most cases in our field, timing is of the essence, and you just have to time your stone just right to ensure that you get the right consistency and the correct finish that you like with the material that you're using. So in this particular case, a half and half plaster mix. You can see some of the parts of it, they're starting to lose the glossiness, so I can start carving them back like so, and possibly start exposing the sides of the flask. And this is why I like using my fond stock, because now I can go around the flask and expose the ledge of the flask just like so. Now that the stone plaster mix is starting to go through its initial setting stage. And then I can use the tip of my fond stock to shape and ensure that I don't have any undercuts in the investment, as well as block out any undercuts on the model. Back here, and I can use my hand just to wipe off the excess. Back here. And be very careful around this area and make sure that we block out certainly the teeth on the cast. Take a little bit off here and add. Take your time now. The investment mix is starting to get harder and harder, and actually I'm able to start carving it soon versus just shaping it around. Again, right back here. Take your time investing this, because you don't want to have any questions in your mind once you boil off the wax and start separating your flask. There shouldn't be any problem separating your flask. So I've blocked out, you can see here, the central completely. Maybe a little bit more right here. And still leave the prosthetic tooth exposed. So I think to get this high degree of accuracy that I hope you can appreciate, will be very difficult to do so if you start investing 2 cases at a time. Maybe sometime in the future, but when you first start doing this, I strongly advise you to do 1 at a time to make sure that you don't run out of time. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to let that set just a little bit more. And I just want to verify with the top half of the flask to make sure that I'm still below the height of the flask, just barely. This case happened to be rather on the tall side, but I think I'll be okay, and especially when I put the lid on, it looks like everything is closing pretty nicely. So I'll put this back. Now I can go over to the sink. And with a gentle stream of water, not too hot, not too cold, just off the sides of the flask here. The investment is still somewhat on the soft side, so I'm not going to go. I'm going to let it set just a little bit more. So I've kind of feathered the plaster a little bit over the occlusal to block out any possible undercuts there. They aren't really, but maybe just under the wire itself. You can see the wire there is exposed a little bit. It's not the end of the world. It's certainly not, certainly it didn't create any undercut there. Here. And I want to get the surface of the investment as smooth as possible to fit up against the second half of the investment. And it makes it a whole lot easier for things to come together when we start packing acrylic, and certainly a lot easier for things to come apart when we're deflasking the case. A little bit of water over it. It's almost at the right setting consistency, not yet. Still got another few minutes to go. So I'm just going to let that sit a little bit. And I'm just going to go back to my foam stock while I got a few minutes. And shape this little bit here. Now I can actually carve the stone. Try not to chip it. Just get a nice clean finish. Especially in here. Nice tapered look with no undercuts whatsoever. Got a little bit of investment inside the margin here. It's okay. See if I can wash that off. Okay, that's a little bit better that I can rub my finger against the plaster stone mix and get a more of a smoother consistency now, and just smooth out any imperfections that I might have created earlier. You want to make sure you time this properly. If you do it too early, you're just going to be displacing the plaster. If you do it too late, obviously the plaster is not going to give, and you're going to have a very rough finish with your investment for the second stage. So I think that's pretty good. We're going to let that set, and we can move on to the lower.